Right. Good morning, everyone. Or good almost afternoon. Good morning. Hello. All right. So welcome to our Protecting Small Cetaceans webinar. This is co-hosted by ASCOBANS, the HELCOM Secretariat, as well as the Protect Baltic project. And today also happens to be Happy World Wildlife Conservation Day. So it is a very fitting day to do this webinar on. So welcome, and it's very exciting to see you all here. My name is Katja Langi. I work at the HELCOM Secretariat, and we are based in Helsinki, Finland, for those of you who might not know that. And I'm also involved in the Protect Baltic project specifically, and you'll see some of my colleagues in the room here as well. And essentially, our project aims to increase ecologically relevant spatial protection in the Baltic Sea by producing various tools and a regional protection optimization framework. And because of that reason, this webinar is extremely relevant to our project as well. And hence we are collaborating together with ASCOBANS to bring this to you today. I will quickly share the program in case you weren't aware what is happening today. So we are in the welcome and round of introduction section at the moment. We will have a few presentations. One is from Ida Karlin, and she will present, of course, on the actual results from the workshops that were held and that this webinar is all about. So that will be in two parts. There will be a short break in between. And then we also will have a presentation by Alexandra Kolbing, and she will talk from a perspective of an MPA manager and how these tools can be used in practice. There will be time for discussion after each of these presentations. However, we are wanting to make this quite an interactive session. So if you have a question whilst a presenter is presenting, they are actually quite happy for you to ask it in the middle. As you can see, you are able to put your videos on. You are also able to put your hands up. You can also unmute yourself. So if you have a question, you can ask it directly. If you are feeling shy today or less social, you can also ask it in the Q&A section. And then I'll do the asking for you. So either way, you can choose which one suits you best. All right, so I'm going to first introduce Jenny Renel, and she is the coordinator of ASCOBANS, and she works at the UN Environment Programme. So she will start us off with a quick introduction of what ASCOBANS is. Over to you, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Katja. Okay, let me share my screen. I'll show you some maps. So here you should be seeing the ASCOBANS agreement area. We are covering Baltic, Northeast Atlantic, Irish, and North Seas. And ASCOBANS, like Katja says, is a United Nations treaty. It's a legally binding one. And we are administered by the United Nations Environment Programme. We have 10 parties, which you can see in dark green in the map here. And our secretariat is based in Bonn, Germany, with the Convention on Migratory Species. So ASCOBANS covers any species, subspecies, or populations of toothed whales occurring in the agreement area, and this also includes the harbour porpoise. Oh, just to note that even though sperm whale it has teeth, it's not covered in the species because it's considered too big to be a small cetacean. And then just shortly about the aim of the agreement. So the aim is really to promote close cooperation to achieve and maintain a favorable conservation status for small cetaceans in the agreement area, because these are migratory species. We want to take care of them all together. And the workshops and their results that you will hear soon are part of these efforts that ASCOBANS is trying to do. And with that, I'll thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And then before we start the presentations officially, I just want to introduce our two speakers for today. And that is, as mentioned earlier a little bit already, Ida Karlin, and she is the chair of the ASCOBANS Working Group for the Baltic and Belt Sea Harbour Porpoise populations, also known as the Estonia Group. And then we have Alexandra Kolbing, who's a marine biologist and environmental manager at the County Administrative Board of Gotland in Sweden. So they will do the two presentations today, but the first up would be Ida, and I'm going to hand over to you to start us off. Thank you.
Yes, great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good morning for me still. Can you see my presentation okay now?
We can, thank you.
Good. Very good. Yes, so I will start us off. My presentation is divided into several bits, and I will do the first four parts of this before the break, and then the last part after the break. So I just wanted to start with giving a bit of an introduction on how we came to take on this work with conservation objectives and conservation measures for small cetaceans. It started with a discussion in ASCOBANS where we felt that the MPAs that were designated for small cetaceans were not completely well managed, and we thought that part of the reason for that is that the MPA managers obviously are not always cetacean specialists, so it's difficult to know what you can do, what is reasonable and suitable measures in an MPA for small cetaceans. And then we also, when we had discussed this a little bit, we added on the conservation objective. So how do you word the objective for an MPA, or the objectives for an MPA for small cetaceans? Because especially for Natura 2000 areas, the objective can be quite important legally when you, for example, have permitting procedures to maybe build a wind farm in or outside the MPA. It's important to have an objective for the area that is well thought through, so that you can actually compare the effects of exploitation against that objective. So that's why we decided to start first with one workshop. And this was in 2020. So we were planning to have a physical in-person workshop in Finland, but eventually we realized that we couldn't really carry that through because we couldn't meet. So we decided to do the first workshop online. And that was an exciting thing to do. It's to make it more involved, to make people feel more involved. I actually ended up sending out care packages to all the participants so that we had something in common instead of just sitting online and being very... It's easy for an online meeting to become a bit impersonal. So yeah, the focus of the workshops was to develop and discuss these examples of well-formulated conservation objectives, and to also discuss sort of innovative and ambitious conservation measures for small cetaceans. And we did this, we had a facilitator to make sure that everyone was heard, and she was also an expert in both conservation standards and in really inclusive ways of working. So there was a lot of post-its in the second in-person workshop, but also my rewards and such in the first online workshop. And we had representation from science, from different levels of management, and from environmental NGOs. So we had quite a good mix of people, and we actually kept the number of participants to a certain level to not make it too many people, because it then becomes more difficult to involve everyone. And this here you see an example of one of the Miro boards. So we were all in very hands-on in creating the results. And a lot of the work was based on the open conservation standards. And we did, for the conservation objectives, we talked a lot about SMART goals. So, and then we had as a background also a commission note on setting conservation objectives for Natura 2000 areas. And we had a participant from the commission participating, which was really good. We used situation models, so looking at, this is, you can see one of those here. This is basically looking at what causes the issue and sort of trying to think of the whole chain of actions and results so that you can identify where it's more suitable to take measures. So where in this system of actions and effects can you actually take measures? And also we used results chains, which is a way of analyzing when you take an action, you have a lot of assumptions on how that action will work, how that measure will impact the impact on the cetacean in the end. And so this is quite a useful exercise to really analyze what's your assumptions and are you missing steps? So are you assuming things that might not be correct? So that's what we did to come up with the things that I'm going to present to you now. In order to make this work, we structured it so that we focused on certain threats to small cetaceans. So we tried to encompass as much as we could. So we had, for example, bycatch, impulsive and continuous underwater noise. Prey depletion that we see now is becoming more and more of an issue. Environmental contaminants and pollutants is obviously a big problem for most cetacean populations. Also, apart from underwater noise, there's also a part of disturbance that comes from just the presence of humans. And then last but not least, general habitat quality. So effects from maybe bottom trawling or exploitation in different ways have effects on the populations. So those are the threats that we sort of used as a basis for discussions. And now we come into conservation objectives, and they are structured based on these threats. But we also wanted to start with a more general. So obviously, your main aim when you have an MPA for small cetaceans is that you want the population to reach a good conservation status, favorable conservation status. So we also tried to formulate a conservation objective for that goal or target. So you will see these are now, the presentation will be a bit maybe boring because it's just sort of looking at all these conservation objectives. Please feel free to put your hand up if you have questions or anything. And you can see that there's a lot of little asterisk stars because that's where you insert if there's a specific species or maybe the year by which you want to have this goal reached. So for species conservation status, our main or the conservation objective that we came up with is to, by a certain year, the relative abundance of the species during a certain period of the year has increased from X to Y within this site and contributing to the overall conservation status of the population. So basically you look at the relative situation based on a baseline from maybe now, and in 10 years maybe you want to see an increase of detections or counted animals, or depending on what kind of monitoring you have. And as I said, it's not super easy, and we're definitely not saying that these are the perfect conservation objectives, but these are at least what we came up with during these workshops based on SMART goals. So they have to be like timed, and they have to be achievable, and they have to be, all these things. So moving on to bycatch, which is obviously one of the main issues for small cetaceans. We came up with 3 different objectives. The first one is to have 0 bycatch of the species in the MPA by a certain year. So that's very clear. It's very simple. Obviously, you have to monitor to know if you reach any of these goals. The second one is adequate monitoring to detect bycatch with a certain level of confidence of the species by a certain year. So this is basically putting a monitoring program in place and what you want that monitoring program to achieve. And then another thing that might cause bycatch is ghost gear. So abandoned fishing gear that continues to fish in the area. And so the third conservation objective on bycatch is by a certain year, there is no ghost gear present in the MPA. Yes, so that's the first slide on conservation objectives. Moving on to underwater noise. Here we combined continuous and impulsive underwater noise. So by a certain year, the ambient noise within the site will be maintained below a certain level, and impulsive noise will be limited to a certain % of the site within the period. Here, as in all of these, there is possibilities to specify even further. This is how far we got during the workshops, but there's always adjustments that can be made, and I'm sure you can come up with different conservation objectives for all these. I think the main thing that you can maybe take home, if you want to take home one thing from this, is how to word a conservation objectives that actually allows you to have a SMART goal. The other one that we came up with, if the site doesn't have good conservation status at the moment, so you want to lower underwater noise, is that by a certain year, ambient noise within the site will be reduced to below a certain level, and impulsive noise will be limited to a certain % of the site within a certain period. When it comes to environmental contaminants and pollutants, this is maybe one of the most difficult threats to come up with both objectives and measures for, because it's something that is often comes from outside of the area. So we struggle quite a bit with this, but the one objective that we came up with is that the introduction into the marine environment, or the concentration in the marine environment, or in the species of this a certain pollutant is reduced by X% by a certain year. For example, comparing to a certain reference year. Yes. So when it comes to prey depletion, our suggestion would be to, by a certain year, a minimum of the MPA is closed for all fisheries, and there is monitoring and enforcement in place to ensure compliance. So this is to make sure that there is enough food for the animals within the MPA. On disturbance from the presence of humans, we suggested by a certain year, any cetacean watching activities within the MPA are regulated and monitored and are not causing disturbance individually or cumulatively with other activities. So that's for cetacean watching. And by a certain year, any human activities within the MPA are regulated and monitored and are not causing disturbance individually or cumulatively with other activities. And habitat quality. So here we have a certain % of the MPA is covered by good quality habitat for the species or a certain % of the MPA is covered by good quality habitat for the species, including a certain % of undisturbed seabed habitat, a certain % of water column habitat, supporting resilient and diverse stocks of prey species. So to make sure that the area is suitable and healthy for the animals to thrive. And obviously, many of these things are really difficult to monitor and measure. So when you set any conservation objective that you set, you need to think about how you measure it, how you monitor it, and what good status means, and so on. So it's quite tricky, but we really think that these types of conservation objectives will help to set the targets to manage your areas. Yes, and that's my pause. That's my pause slide. So we can open for questions or any comments or anything.
Thank you, Ida. Yes, does anybody have questions, comments? As mentioned before, you can use the Q&A section, but I see a hand, which is great. Maria, please go ahead.
Hello, I'm not sure you hear me. You hear me well?
We do.
Good.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. I'm coming from the Blue Connect project on the that we also have one of the sites that we're working on is a corridor for cetaceans and the PSSA. So it's very interesting for us because we're thinking how to look at this. And regarding and I think it's ideal because that is how the approach should be, and I found that using the open standards, it helps very much to address these aspects. I was just wondering about when you define these conservation objectives in the group, because for example, on fishing, there's different gears. I'm not sure the setup on your area when you're using also the noise aspects. So depending on that aspect, who you have in the room, you may get to different ways of approaching it. For example, on bycatch, maybe the zero target is a bit difficult because you don't have the fishery technician or the fishery technology aspects within them because on some. So I just wonder how you come up to integrate these comments and for example, will be no testing mitigation measures for reducing bycatch be also an end goal there to approach, or it is a step goal in the middle, or just to understand that aspect on there, and the same for the noise because this is a difficult one as well.
Yeah, noise is really, really tricky. I mean, now the EU, when it comes to noise, the European Commission has developed slightly more specified targets for MSFD descriptive 11, and those weren't available yet when we did this. So I think that would be helpful to sort of relate to that. But when it comes to underwater noise, you first have to establish. I think that's what they are discussing now in the TG noise group, like what level of noise is the limit, and then you look at percentages and how big an area is affected and so on. But you need to set that. There is an abbreviation that I forgot. I think Matt, I will remember.
It is LOVE, if I may.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, level of biological onset of biological effects, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. So you need to set that level, and I think that will then help make sure that you have good objectives for underwater noise in the area. And obviously, in an MPA, the targets or the objectives should be more ambitious than for the ocean at large. So the TG noise or the MSFD levels should be yeah, we should exceed those in an MPA, is my view. When it comes to bycatch and having everyone in the room and so on, I don't know, it probably works differently in different countries and so on. In Sweden, these targets are set by the managers. So I think eventually it falls on the manager, MPA managers, to set the targets. But obviously it's very good if you have this stakeholder discussion before that. But yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind that the main objective of the area is to protect the cetaceans. If that's what the area is designated for, that would be the main, the main point. But maybe you can, did you have, I don't think I answered your question, so please go ahead and ask again if there's anything you wanna.
No, it's just, it was more about, shouldn't be more that specific targets regarding mitigation measures within the bycatch. For example, I just don't know the situation of the MPAs, but you have long liners, you may have pelagic or other type of nets. So I was just wondering about, would it make more sense to try to identify which ones are the targets there, and then
Absolutely
addressing the zero bycatch on those specifically?
Yes.
Or is that what is expected? Or no, I was not confused. I was just wondering how you identify those targets in general.
Yeah, I think it's important to look at, I mean, to start with, which types of fisheries causes the bycatch. It might be that some types of fisheries don't cause bycatch. In the Baltic, for example, we have only the harbor porpoise, and the main issue is gill nets. So most other types of fisheries is not an issue, at least not for bycatch. It might be an issue for the prey depletion part, but for bycatch, you basically only look at gill nets. So that's obviously the start of this, is looking at, and I think ICES has done some good work on cetacean populations and sort of doing a risk assessment per area, per fishing year, and per species. So there might be something that you can pick up from ICES on this.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much, Maria. Marta next, please.
Yes, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I have a couple of questions. I heard now that you did this before the EU work, but now I'm thinking, do you plan to continue working on this? I mean, to further define this? That could be my first question. Especially, as you can imagine, I'm thinking about underwater noise. And also, I was thinking, also bearing in mind the developments at the International Maritime Organization level, when they are focusing on each type of ship, could it make sense to also have a new conservation status objective focusing on that? You know, because I mean, they are working now on the reference levels of noise that each type of ship should have. So I don't know if you have been thinking about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Marta. Yes, good. Two very good points. First, I start from the end. Absolutely. If IMO is working on the levels of noise from different types of ships, that's very relevant. And I think that will vary quite a lot between MPAs, like what kinds of shipping you have in there. And if there's, I know there's been discussions, for example, in the Baltic with this big MPA where the shipping lane goes straight through to sort of reroute, but that's kind of tricky. But looking at the kinds of traffic and the possibility to reroute if you think that will have an impact, I think that's something that you should take in mind and into consideration. And yes, so definitely, as I said, that the EU work on MSFD, the descriptor 11, is going to have a big impact on how you can word these objectives. We don't have a plan to continue this work at the moment, but obviously I would love to. So we will see if at some point we do a new round and have some more work on this. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kaminska. Katarzyna, sorry.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for a very good presentation. I have a question about your vision. How do you think this target should be fulfilled? Whether it should be really based on general targets that are set within EU, or also each country should decide on them for each MPA. What do you think should be the right approach on this? Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. I think, I mean, this is my personal opinion now. I definitely think that there should be a minimum level of objectives and measures in an MPA for it to be called an MPA. I mean, it's still quite tricky, and there's no such discussion at all within the EU at the moment, which I think is a bit missing. So yeah, maybe that's something to try and lift to the next level, a suggestion to have certain minimum levels set for MPAs based on what they are designated for and so on, because that's still the prerequisites of the Habitats Directive, that they are set for a certain species or a certain habitat. So it will vary, but yeah, that's something to think about. And obviously, the work that we've done in these workshops, we hope that it will be used to get to level up the protection a little bit in the MPAs. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions? If not, my suggestion is we would have actually gone into a break, but I feel like we're only half an hour into this. So my suggestion would perhaps be that Ida, you continue with the conservation measures toolbox. We'll have another discussion after that, and then we'll have a quick break in between, if that would work for you. Okay, yeah. Great. So let's head into the next section. Thank you.
All right. This one is slightly longer. So repeating again, we will now start with part 5. Here we go per threat again, and here we used the situation models that I mentioned before. So looking at all of the ways that our human activities cause bycatch, for example, and then when we analyzed, so in the first workshop, we started by brainstorming. Oh,
I want to make sure you're sharing your screen. Are you meant to be sharing?
I'm probably not.
Okay, great.
Good point. Thank you, Katja. I think you can see it now. Yeah, so in the first workshop, we did a lot of brainstorming, and we specified some of the measures and looked into them more carefully. In the next workshop, we added new measures and analyzed them a little bit further. So for some of them, we did these results chains, and you can see one of the results chain on the screen now for bycatch. So the yellow boxes and the hexagons are like the actions that we put into the chain, and then we can follow some assumptions that will hopefully have an effect at the end on bycatch and reducing bycatch. So conservation measures. The first one is quite obvious. It would be to ban fishing in MPAs designated for small cetaceans. If you ban all fisheries, you get at both bycatch and then also prey depletion. So it can be quite a good measure to make sure that you have a good MPA for cetaceans. Another measure that was discussed quite a lot, and we had some interesting things going on here. It was to introduce some kind of register for fishing gear and fishing operations, including an app to report lost gear. And this is obviously to keep track of the conservation objective on ghost gear, so making sure that you don't have ghost gear in the area. And another one, more simply worded, is to create and implement a system for reduction of lost gear. A more stepwise approach to bycatch would be maybe to stepwise phase out fishing gear causing bycatch of the species within the MPA. So instead of closing all the fisheries at once, you could, in collaboration maybe with fishermen, you can phase out certain types of gear. And the last measure that we discussed was to implement 100% bycatch monitoring coverage in the MPA, using, for example, REM or any kind of monitoring that works, but to make sure that you have sort of full control over the bycatch in the area. Yes, so that's bycatch. And we'll move on to impulsive underwater noise. Here we have separated impulsive and continuous noise because it's slightly... Oh, I have a... okay. The title is slightly covered by an image that I forgot to remove. Sorry about that. Right, so for impulsive underwater noise, one important measure would be to ban military activities within the MPA and the buffer zone. And when it comes to underwater noise specifically, we talk quite a lot about buffer zones because underwater noise travels quite far. So to make sure that you don't have noise within, or not too much noise within the MPA, you might want to use a buffer zone as well. So military activities obviously might be explosions and a lot of sonars and so on, which is damaging to cetaceans. So that's why we suggest to ban those. The other one would be establish and enforce mandatory use of effective mitigation measures, best available techniques and best environmental practices during construction and other noise-emitting activities within the MPA and buffer zone. And this is to make sure that if you have to take measure or do something that creates noise, you at least try to abate the noise as well as possible. Yes.
I believe Maria has a question, so please go ahead.
Yes, go.
Thank you. I just only before can you explain? I think interesting will be also to understand the process to identify the measures. So because I see that there was a lot of middle points on these blue squares that you are putting on the fishing and on this one, and how you set up that to get to the last one. That's my question. It's just a tricky. How do you set up the discussion on there? Thank you.
Yeah. So what we did in the workshops is that we did a lot of brainstorming. So we actually started by just sort of playing, but getting our brain started. What would you do to make this measure worse, or to make this problem worse? So if you wanted to increase underwater noise, what would you do? Just to get our brains going. And then the next step would be to say, so everyone got to make suggestions on what do you think would be a good measure to reduce underwater noise. And then we did quite a lot of reading each other's suggestions, voting on what we thought were the best measures. And then when we had voted, we picked the most popular measures. And then we did these result chains, because that means that you analyze. So this measure says that you ban military activities, for example. Or we can do this one, the one that I have in the image here. So to reduce impulsive underwater noise, you require licenses to do pile driving in the area or in the buffer zone. And what do you think that will mean? What happens when you require licenses? It might mean that actors have to take part in the dialogue because they need the license. And then, yeah, how that moves along and what each step leads to. And if you see, I mean, you might not think this chain is logical, And then you have to think, why is it not logical? Is there a step missing? Do we have assumptions here that are not correct? And so on. So we did some of that discussion in the working group in the workshop. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, fully. I understand that you first identify the end goal, the conservation measures, and then you step back to see the result change. That is
exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thanks. Marta?
Yes, thank you. I have one question because you have this in exceptional circumstances. And the last one, I think that's a tricky one because then you enter into the discussion about what is an exceptional circumstances.
Yes, absolutely.
So I don't know if you were considering that. That's at one point. And another one is like, oh gosh, I forgot it. Yeah, the noise sensitivity period of time. Have you considered that? Because sometimes it may be, how to say it, easier to sell a measure that allows for a little bit of buffer in that sense. So maybe saying, okay, during this time of the year, which is not so critical for this species, these activities can be done. So maybe that could be linked to the exceptional circumstances. I don't know, but just a thought.
Yes,
Thanks.
Absolutely. And this obviously, it is tricky to do this for MPAs in general, because some of these things is obviously quite specific for a certain MPA. So in the Baltic, there are probably some MPAs where we don't have harbor purposes a part of the year. And I agree that exceptional circumstances, but it might be that you have to do something. For example, shipping safety sometimes means you have to dredge a shipping lane or something. It could be things like that. But yes, I just realized, thank you for that question, because someone asked before if we plan to continue this. And one of the things that we said we would like to do as a next step is try and implement some of these things and discuss them in relation to one specific or a few specific areas, just to look more closely at how would you implement these things in relation to specific areas, because that would make us think that one more step, sort of. So yeah, that's a possible plan for the future. All right. No more questions at the moment, then I will continue. Yes, measures for impulsive noise. Banning all impulsive noise sources within the MPA and the buffer zone would be an obvious one. And then, as we discussed, in exceptional circumstances, use permitting or licensing for necessary activities. Yes, another question.
One more question, yes.
Yes, hi, a very interesting presentation. I was wondering, for the buffer zone, who is determining that? Because is that also discussed in TG Noise, or you're referring to MSFD for this, or it's up to the MPA managers?
I don't think Marta or someone might know better, but I don't think buffer zones are discussed. No. Yeah, thank you. Because it's all about the noise level. So what you would have to do, hey, Julia and Pia, what you would have to do is probably calculate how far a certain type of noise travels. But Julia and Pia, maybe you have some input. We can't hear you.
Thanks. So now, about buffer zones, isn't it that the Natura 2000 sites are regulated so that also activities outside the actual sites are not allowed if they have a negative impact on what is aimed to be protected by the site?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
With that, then you can, as you said, you can calculate the buffer zones, for example, for underwater noise. But also in theory, that means for purposes, actually, you shouldn't be, especially like purposes in the Baltic Sea, you should not be allowed to bycatch them anywhere, because it also impacts them in the site because the population is so small. Thanks.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, so, I mean, I think it might be up to the manager in the end. Either you set a good buffer zone that will encompass everything, or you calculate a buffer zone based on the sound that you are thinking about at the moment. But to make sure that the Natura 2000 or the MPA itself isn't exceeding the limits. Alex?
Yes, I just thought I would comment. So as an MPA manager, it's like what Ida says, we who are the managers set the buffer zone depending on the permit that is being applied for. So you base your decision on the buffer zone on the activity or the noise that's being generated. So sometimes the buffer zone could be 9 kilometers, or it could be 500 meters, or it could be, it's a flexible buffer zone, just to make sure that the protection is substantial enough within the area. Yeah.
Thank you. Isabella?
I have more of a question. Since I'm very much on the regulating side, would you suggest to do a buffer zone from like say you have, I don't know, a site that like an offshore wind farm site that's like right next to an MPA, then would you suggest to do a calculation for this buffer zone as a sort of cumulative for this site, or should it be location specific? So for example, you have some locations of the installation process takes place, I don't know, 500 meters from the MPA, but then the general site is so large that it goes up to, I don't know, 10 kilometers away. So should then should you calculate the impact on the MPA for each location separately, or look at it look at the entire site and then say, okay, from this site we have probably an impact of, I don't know, X number of kilometers?
I mean, the whole point of the buffer zone is to make sure that the noise levels are not exceeded within the area. So I'm not sure I understand the question fully, but I would do it whatever way you need to make sure that the levels are not exceeded within the area, right? So if you have an activity in installing the wind farm quite close to the MPA, you need to make sure that the sound from that doesn't sort of enter the MPA. In my book, you would move the wind farm away from the area. I would never put a wind farm like on the border of an MPA. I would move it because you need a buffer between them. Do you understand? Or does that even answer? Yeah.
Yes, of course. Probably that would be the easiest or the logical way to do it. But in the reality, this sometimes doesn't happen. So you have an MPA and right next to it, there will be a site development. And then my question goes more into the direction, okay, when you already have this this site management plan in place, then how do you handle the execution of the construction? Then do you look at the individual, then should you look at the individual installation piles, or should you look at the whole site and say, okay, this site will have an impact on the MPA? Yes, no. If yes, how large is it?
Well, I think that depends on where in the decision process you are. If it's already decided that the wind farm will be in this area or just outside an MPA, then you will have to make sure that you take noise decreasing measures. So you need to use the bubble curtains and everything to make sure that the noise levels are not exceeded within the MPA. But if the decision is more about the location of the wind farm, then you need to sort of make sure you have the buffer zone. I would say that in the end, you have to look at each piling event and make sure that noise doesn't impact the MPA. I don't know if anyone else has a different opinion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. No more questions. I will move on then. Okay. Good. We will move to continuous noise. Here we have a few measures. The first one is establishing temporal or permanent silent zones inside or near MPAs. So basically making sure that we don't have shipping, we don't have wind farm construction and so on within the MPAs. It can also include recreational vessel traffic, for example, which can be quite noisy. Yes, the next one is prohibiting construction or industrial development with negative impact on the species and its prey and habitat within the MPAs and the buffer zone. The next one would be based on modeling results of the best placement to minimize the noise within the MPA while also reducing increases in CO2 emissions to reroute shipping lanes to bypass MPAs. This is, we have an example where we've been considering this in the Baltic Sea. So far, the shipping lane has not been moved, but it's still an option to make sure that there is not too much noise within the area. You can also implement slowdown rules for vessels within the MPA because it's been shown that basically in all instances, lower velocities, speed limits lowers the noise. So if a ship drives slower, it will lower the noise levels. And also quite an obvious one is to restrict the use of acoustic deterrent devices within the MPA. Most of us don't even think that we should have ADDs within MPAs, but yeah, you should at least consider it very closely. Question from Elizabeth.
Yes, I was wondering, is there also like a minimum area defined to have a silent zone? Because now it's still a bit vague how this is defined, or it's not that you say, okay, the full MPA or the strictly protected MPA needs to be fully silent zone, or it's up to the MPA managers again, or I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, obviously, all MPAs would be silent, I would say, but it might vary what you can do, or depending on the size of the area, for example. So I think this is one of the things that you might have to discuss for the specific MPA. But absolutely, you have, you know, it is important the more specific you can be, the better it is in the end, because the easier it is to follow up and make sure that you implement the measures properly. So that comes also both to like the objective, but also to the measure. What is it exactly that you want to do and how do you reach it?
And maybe also to look at the more national or regional aspect, like to define the full amount of silent zones you need for your population.
Yeah,
instead
absolutely.
of very specific.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. Yes, thank you. Anyone else? The next one is contaminants and pollutants. This, as I said, this is really tricky. Here we don't have a results chain, so this image basically shows the situation model. So what is it that leads to contamination and effects on small cetaceans? As you can see, there's a lot. Yeah, so the measures that we came up with is to remove pollutants from MPAs, including, for example, dumped pollutants, barrels, PCBs, munitions, and so on, which is present, for example, in the Baltic Sea and I think in the North Sea as well, to make sure that they don't leak and cause continuous contamination. And also marine debris, we included marine debris and microplastics and so on in this headline. The other would be to prohibit harmful emissions from industries inside of the MPA and to avoid them outside of the MPA, obviously. for example, aquaculture, wind farms, vessel exhaust cleaning systems called scrubbers, cooling water, and so on. You should not be allowed to put those out within an MPA, but also we need to work overall to stop these things. And I know that Sweden is banning scrubber exhaust in territorial waters. So that I think is in place already. And I think that work should continue as well. Okay. Isis? Question? I think I heard something. Go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you, Ida. I was going to just wait until you finish the conservation measures to like ask my questions, but since you were talking about this, that maybe the measures have to go outside the MPA zones, I was wondering about also the other measures that you talked previously. Like you guys seem to use a lot like within the MPAs and within the buffer zones. But as we know, like the cetaceans do travel a lot outside these zones. Like how don't you think that the measures should include like higher or like larger areas, not only in the MPAs? I know that you talked about that this has to be done, from the emissions. It has to be done all over, but what about the other measures that you talked about it previously? Why did you guys decide to just focus on like MPA and buffer zones?
Yeah, so the aim of the workshops that we had was specifically how to manage MPAs.
Okay.
But obviously countries, especially member countries in the EU, have to manage the species everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
But that wasn't the target of the workshops.
Yes, perfect.
So yes, there are some measures that, I mean, ideally should be taken everywhere.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And my second question was more like out of curiosity. Did you guys look at any like management plans that are currently in place and seeing if some of these measures are already being implemented? Have you guys checked that out, or like if we are far behind what these measures are looking at, or maybe some countries have already implemented some of these measures?
We haven't looked at it specifically, but one of the things that triggered the workshops was the fact that we saw that cetacean MPAs are not managed in order to protect cetaceans really well. But after my presentation and the break, we will hear from Alex, who is a manager, so we can hear at least for a few areas or what she does.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I will move on. Yeah, so prey depletion. So this is, it's become, especially in the Baltic, I don't know what the situation is, but I think there are signs in quite a few areas that harbor porpoises are not getting as much food as they need, because porpoises especially are very sensitive to starvation. So that's why we brought this up. To manage prey depletion, you can create no-take zones in and around the MPAs. So ideally, obviously, the whole MPA would be a no-take zone, but that's not always politically possible. Ensure that key habitats for prey species are under protection from harmful activities. For example, bottom trawling in an MPA might not be ideal because it ruins the habitat for the prey species. To restore degraded key habitats like reefs and eelgrass and meadows and bladderwrack communities for prey species to make sure that they can reproduce and have healthy populations. And lastly, to develop and adopt an approach to setting fishing quota through an ecosystem-based approach to management instead of, as we have today, the fishing quotas usually only take into account how much fishing mortality we have. They should also take into account the ecosystem needs. And that's more of a overall EU-wide measure, the last one. Okay, any questions on this one? No? Right, moving on. Disturbance from the presence of humans. This is obviously very closely connected to underwater noise, but it has been shown that not only the noise, but also the presence of vessels and humans and other human activities will impact the behavior of cetaceans. So the first one we came up with here is to update the electronic navigation systems to include MPA boundaries so that people know that there is an MPA here. And you can also then accompany this with details about ecology as well as a map alerts that display allowable and prohibited activities within each MPA. So if it's clear to those using sea charts, for example, that this is an MPA and there is some things that you cannot do in this area, that would obviously make it a lot easier for people to adhere to whatever rules are set in place. Put in place sufficient patrolling and enforcement of MPAs to avoid harmful activities. Establish codes of conduct, appropriate regulations for all vessels engaging with cetaceans with them in MPAs, so that it's clear for everyone how you behave if you're in a boat and there are cetaceans in the water. Ensure that regular vessel traffic does not go through the MPA. We discussed this a little bit when we talked about underwater noise. And to implement guidelines and or rules for leisure activities inside and or close to the MPA. So this could be, you could limit the use of certain recreational vehicles like jet skis, for example. You can implement speed limits and so on. So that's some things that you can do to limit the disturbance. I'm looking if there's any questions. No. And then habitat quality. So this is more, I mean, underwater noise is an element in habitat quality, but this is looking at some of the other elements of that. For example, you could prohibit all activities with negative impact on the habitats and species within an MPA. That's approaching what we would call a strictly protected area. So making sure all human activities in an area are prohibited or limited in some way. One quite obvious thing is to ban dredging, seabed mining, and so on within the MPA and their buffer zones. And lastly, looking at historical records to understand optimal habitat in the MPA and restore them to this baseline. So you can plant seagrass, you can remove invasive species, and now we have something called the Nature Restoration Regulation, which is specifically designed to that we should restore nature. And in the ocean, that is often done through passive restoration. So you don't, I mean, you can plant seagrass, which is an active restoration activity, which is very costly. So mostly, especially in the marine environment, stopping the human activities like fishing and so on is the best way to restore marine habitats. Yes, I think that was the last one. Yes. I see Marta.
Yes, just it's just my humble opinion, but I think that the removal of non-indigenous species is quite an impossible task. So maybe if we focus on prevention, could be better on new introductions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's correct.
Okay, Great. Thank you so much, Ida. Now we will take a break, unless there are some other questions that some still have. But let's have a 10-minute break. So I'd like to ask all of you to come back 11:15 or 12, wherever you may be. And so let's be back 15:15, and then we'll hear from Alexandra afterwards about what it actually means to implement some of these as an MPA manager. So see you back in 10. Thank you.
See you soon.
All right, great. Thanks for coming back. Hope you had a good break. And without further ado, we can continue with the program. And I'd like to hand over to Alexandra, who will tell you more about the life of an MPA manager and how this all fits together. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share my presentation now. Let me know if you see it.
We can see it. Perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Hello, everybody. It's really strange to hold a presentation to people you can't really see, but I'll get used to it. So I'm going to talk to you guys today about the role as an MPA manager, and specifically the monitoring of certain conservation objectives, but also give you examples of the objectives that we have set for this protected area and other things we do to reach those objectives. So the area in question, let's see if this works now. Changing slides. So I'm going to start with introducing the area, and then the conservation objectives, and then the monitoring, and then results in the monitoring, and then what is next. So it's 5 steps to this presentation. I really hope that it will give you the information that could further your work with your individual MPAs. So the MPA in question is the area Hoburgsbanken and Midsjöbankarna, located in the Baltic Sea, and it's about 1 million hectare big, and it's the reproductive site of the critically endangered Baltic proper harbour porpoise. And conservation targets or objectives are set for the population number, food availability, and limiting negative impact. And this tool that Ida was talking about, we have used this tool to write the certain conservation objectives. So for example, here are some examples of the objectives in question. And here we have the annual detection frequency of harbour porpoises must increase by at least 4% with at least 80% probability. So here we have really tried to specify clearly what with numbers, so like these SMART goals that Ida was talking about. And in some of our objectives, we've also set a time limit. So by, for example, 2100, the harbour porpoise population should have reached favourable conservation status. But in other for other conservation objectives, it's quite difficult to frame or to say exactly what to set a specific number or year. But there we have worked to make it as available as possible for the people who, or the actors who would like a permit to do their different activities. But for example, the impulsive noise from human activities that may cause PTS, TTS, or behavioral disturbance does not occur during any time of the year. Here we haven't specified the threshold for PTS, TTS, and behavioral disturbance, but that is defined in scientific articles, for example. So there you have to use updated research. So we don't lock ourselves in to one specific threshold if that threshold actually may change. But some of these, I'm not going to read them all out loud, but some of these we are, as an MPA manager, we don't have the mandate to do anything about ourselves. So we're dependent on other national agencies, or in some cases the EU or the IMO. So these 3 are examples of those. So in the MPA, harbour porpoise mortality caused by human activities must be 0. Because the area in question is within Swedish exclusive economic zone, we need to have an EU decision, so based in the EU common fisheries law. So it needs to be regulated on that level, which means that I don't have the power to do so. I can kickstart the process, but I don't have a say in how the regulation will be done. With no environmentally hazardous discharges is the same as well. It's controlled by international law, and the same with shipping lanes. So there, as an MPA manager, it's very frustrating because you can't, you know it's a problem, but you can't really do anything about it. You just have to keep pushing, keep lifting it to the levels above you, to national agencies or the government, the Swedish government, to say that this is still a problem, we still need to do this to reach the objectives of the, or like the goal of the whole MPA, the conservation objective. But today I'm going to talk specifically about 3 objectives that we are actively monitoring. And those are: the area should contribute to reaching favorable conservation status. So this is connected to the increase in detection. The area should act as a nursery. Food availability should be as such that it supports a favorable population size. So I'm going to focus on these 3, but I can absolutely take questions regarding the other objectives as well. So with monitoring, the first one then, contribute to reaching favorable conservation status. We have done 3 years of a toad array in the area during August for 2022, 2024 and 2025. And with this method, so essentially you sail in transects with a hydrophone, with several hydrophones driving behind you, and this will register the harbour porpoise clicks. And upon analysis, you can then see exactly where the harbour porpoise is or was in relation to the boat. So this image on the top left shows the direction of the boat and how, and then a hydrophone, and you can then assess, you can figure out, you can calculate rather, that the harbour porpoise was 400 meters port side, which can give you a map like this. So you can have, so you get, so you know where in the area they are, which is really important when you assess habitat preference. So during the we get a live feed on the sailing boat in this program, so you can see if there's a harbour porpoise present or not in nearby, and the clicks register as little red triangles, and then this is what you would like to see, this trail of clicks. It's a really useful tool. And like I said, we've done this 3 years in a row, and it's been a very successful 3 very successful surveys. But it's very weather dependent, and hence choosing August. It would be good to do it several times during the year, but the cost of it and the weather dependency, the method isn't great for the Baltic Sea. So we only do it in August. And the next, the area should act as a nursery. We deploy these click detectors, FPODs, together with with Pia and Julia, actually, who are here at the moment. They work for the Swedish National History Museum. And I can't show you exactly where these FPODs are located, but these stars give an approximation of the area where we have them. So these FPODs are out all year round and can tell us the difference in activity over the year. But unfortunately, they can't distinguish between adult and calf. So we can't say today if it is used as a nursery, but knowing when the harbour porpoise do give birth to their calves, we assume that it is being used as a nursery because they're there all year round. The food availability should be such that it supports a population size. So this is the third objective that I'm going to talk about. And for this, we use a more innovative method than the traditional method of going out in a big boat, trawling for fish and bringing it up, counting it, measuring it. So we use a sailing drone, which is about 2 meters long and is powered by wind and solar panels, solar energy. And you can see in this image to your left, you can see the track, so the orange parts. You can see how it sails. And so you program it and give it certain routes, but then it goes a little bit off route because of the wind and the waves. And sometimes it gets stuck in a ship, or like it gets dragged along, and then it finally gets loose, and then it tries to get back to the track. So that's why it gets a little bit higgly-piggly in the area. And the 2 red lines, the thick lines going across the MPA, is the 2 shipping lanes. And we try to avoid them as much as possible. But anyway, so, and this method is actually 125th of the cost of a traditional method. So it's much cheaper, and it's also autonomous data collection. But it doesn't only register prey species, it also registers temperature, chlorophyll, zooplankton, depth. So here we can get a lot of data on the health of the ecosystem overall in the MPA from this little sailing boat, which is great. So for the results, so what do we know? The population estimate in the area, same as SAMBOB 1. So we don't see an increase or decrease of hard porpoise presence in the area compared to 10 years ago. We know that the surveying methods work, which was a big question actually when we started this. It was a test. We didn't know if it was going to work, but it works. And we know that the hard porpoise are in the area all year. And my biggest tip or suggestion for everyone is to collaborate closely with scientists. It's essential, because then you can be part of developing things like this that will further your MPA management and give you the information you want, because we're all on, MPA managers are on governmental budgets, and they are small. They're not enough to cover the cost of managing a large MPA like this. But what don't we know? We don't know if there's enough fish to sustain the population, because we haven't done the analysis yet. If there is habitat preference, or if the area actually acts as a nursery, or how our other conservation objectives are doing. We don't know that either. But what is next then for us is that we're going to do 1 more year of survey, and then a multifaceted analysis of all the fish data, the whole porpoise data, the habitat data that we've collected. And we're also trying out a new method where we are going to, unfortunately, ditch the sailing boat and add a harbor porpoise monitoring onto the sailing drone itself, so you can do fish and harbor porpoise simultaneously. We don't know exactly how that's going to work yet, so we're still testing it out. But here we're working closely with the scientists and different universities to develop this. And we're also working with AI Sweden to develop an AI model for analysis, so you can cut costs and time even more. And then we're writing a plan for reaching other conservation objectives. So, for example, one objective is that there's no human-caused deaths in the area. Gill nets are banned, but there are still ghost nets in the area, so we need to remove those. And doing this result chain exercise, the same as in the ASCOBANS workshop, for these objectives that are more difficult to reach. So what can we do to influence the government or the EU to make decisions about rerouting shipping traffic, or lowering the speed limits, or lowering the speed of shipping and things like that. And that is all I have to say, actually. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I see a question from Elizabeth. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Very nice presentation. I was wondering, for the fish survey, is it active or is it echo sounders that you are using on the sailing drone to measure the prey?
Sorry, could you repeat that, please? Yeah, it's the echo sounder on the drone. Yes.
Okay. We are currently we submitted a paper where we see that the echo sounders affect the detection of harbor porpoise echolocation. So I can forward it to you if you want. If you combine the two technologies, okay.
Okay, if you combine them too. Yeah, we have thought that maybe it's better to have 2 drones. So you do one for fish and one for harbor porpoise, and then you sort of go. They don't go exactly next to each other, but they go sort of intertwined somehow. But that's really, really good. Am I still sharing my screen, by the way?
No.
Good.
Thank you. Maria, you can go next, please.
Thank you, Alessandra, for the nice presentation as well. I was just wondering, taking on also what we saw before, I was just wondering, what you're trying to establish is the baseline for the conservation objectives to see, because I see that you have an objective that should be contributing to reach the conservation of the species, but it's very broad. And before we saw that there should be smart conservation objectives. I understand it, because if we don't have the baseline, maybe it's difficult to reach that, or it's because it's not difficult as a manager to put a target yet. So it's more about, from the management aspects, what I would like to see the feedback from your side.
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, is how you write the target to fit with management.
Yes, exactly, because you are describing it as should be the area should be contribute to reach conservation objectives, which is a very general statement. So that is my question, because obviously you are doing now the baseline, the knowledge on how the species are there. So I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, so the baseline is from Samba 1. That's our baseline. So when the survey that led to the MPA actually being implemented, and then we are following up on that. So we have the baseline is from more than 10 years ago. But the conservation, the writing in the plan for like the area should contribute to favorable conservation status is more specified than that, written in the plan. So for example, then you should increase, the detection rate should increase 4% per year.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
That is what I was looking for, just to see if you have something very specific and that is addressed through the monitoring that you're doing. Yeah. That is what okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia and Pia?
Yes, thanks a lot, Alexandra. I just wonder, as you have this very good conservation objective with the increase of the population size or detection rates, or have you or do you have plans for doing a power analysis, looking at for how many years do you have to do this monitoring to be able to confirm if you can reach this objective or not?
Well, we have that would be great. I would love to do that. That's definitely needed. Maybe that will come out in the result chain exercise that we're going to do. But definitely, and that's also why I'm already now starting with a bit like more defining the method we're going to use, so we can use it for several years. And then it needs to be cost effective, because otherwise we won't be able to afford it. So we know we need to monitor for many years. I just don't know how many years.
did you consider using passive acoustic monitoring instead with the stationary iPods instead of the towed array when you decided to do the towed array?
Yeah, so we have, so the expense of doing FPODs in the entire area would be larger than doing the towed array.
Mm.
Yes, but we do have FPODs on Hobar's Bank, and then you guys have on Northern Sea Banks. But the optimal thing would be to have FPODs out all year round, because we can only do the towed array in August.
Mm. Mm.
So it would be good.
Yeah, so I also think from the statistical perspective, it would be interesting to do the power analysis comparing the two methods, because maybe even if one method is more costly, if it gives you a result some decade earlier, it may be worth it. Or yeah.
Definitely, we can absolutely continue this conversation. I would love to get all of you guys' feedback for like the long-term plan, because that's something we haven't had in place yet. We haven't had a long-term plan for the management. Like, we have the objectives, and which is great for when we're doing permit processing and setting sort of a direction for the management, but we haven't got a really detailed plan of what to do each year and who's going to do it, how much it's going to cost, and that's what we need to create, essentially.
Yeah. We have a very good basis for it, so this is great.
Yeah,
thank you.
All right, thank you so much. We actually are doing very well for time, so we can open the floor if anybody has any questions, both for Alexandra or Ida. Now would be the time to ask those. We still have a bit of time to do that. So I'm going to see if there are any volunteers. But perhaps otherwise, is there... Oh, yes, Marta, please go ahead.
Sorry, Katja. That's going to be quick. I have a question about the TTS and BTS. Apologies. Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very good. Thank you. But I'm thinking, I do understand that you did not define them because you don't want them to be outdated. But what is the plan to define them? Because, I mean, you pointed out at scientific publications, but as you know, they're very different when it comes to results. And then how are you going to decide which one to pick up? Thanks.
Yes, that's very good. So what we do is that when we have our permit processes, we define them in our decisions. Yeah, so they're not defined in the plan, but they're defined in our the decision we give out. Because of where this MPA is located, there are no fixed rules. It's a Natura 2000 in Swedish exclusive economic zone, so there are no fixed regulations. So each activity will be tested against the conservation plan, unless it's regulated with different legislation, like for fishing, for example, with the EU Common Fisheries Policy. So it's defined that way by us, because I do the permit processing myself. So then I can just look at what's the newest threshold, and yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Emily, please go ahead.
Hi, it's kind of a question for everyone, really. So I'm based over the other side of the North Sea from you in Shetland, and we've not got any MPAs designated for harbour porpoises or any cetaceans around Shetland, but we do have the new Shetland and Faroe Island important marine mammal area. So we're kind of trying to think of ways that we could do monitoring and potentially conservation measures for cetaceans here without actually having the MPA title, but just a different title that it's an IMA instead. So I was wondering about the measures that you showed this morning, Ida, and about the monitoring work that's going on, Alexandra, about how applicable for the cetacean species what we've talked about this morning could be. So is it very, I guess you guys have been very porpoise specific and local to your area, but some of the measures look like they could be a really useful guide for us to follow over here, and not necessarily implement all of them. I just wondered how much you thought it would be easy to apply to other cetacean species. We've got dolphins over here, killer whales, and bigger baleen whales too, as well as harbour porpoises. So yeah, it'd be good to hear.
Yeah, I can let you know. So ASCOBANS talks about small cetaceans, as Jenny mentioned at the beginning. So the workshops aimed to talk about small cetaceans in general. Yes, there was maybe a bit of a harbour porpoise focus because we were in the Baltic. But most of the measures and objectives you should be able to at least adapt to where you are, I think. And also, I think it's important to keep in mind, this is not the only correct way to do it or the only way to word it. Or, I mean, this is a start, and I think more work is needed, and I don't think will ever be done. But maybe it's something that you can use as inspiration, and yeah.
Awesome, thank you. It looks a great guide. I think it's something that everyone is trying to grapple with, making these measures. So yeah, it looks great. Keep you posted.
Yeah, thanks.
Great, thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? Hey, yes, please go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for both presentations. They were very inspiring, but also formulating some own things about what to do in the future. But I have some comments, Ida, to your presentation and to results of the workshop. Under at least 3 different targets which you mentioned. When I put them together, I see clearly that there is a lack of some important threats for harbour porpoises and the MPAs. And please, confirm or not if this is covered or not with these recommendations. The first goes under impulsive noise, where I couldn't notice the blasting diminution as the very big threat, considering at least what is happening in our MPAs in the Putsk Bay. And this is the activity which is decided by the managing authorities of the MPA, but of course the work is done by the military, and this goes under the category the highest importance for the safety reasons, human safety reasons, and they don't actually need any permissions or anything. They just do it. And I was thinking maybe this, there should be one thread added there with some guidelines that, I don't know, for the reason of necessary blasting, that there should be the all efficient mitigation methods used, or this goes more under the pollutant part, that this, as it was mentioned already there, that if possible, that the munition should be extracted to land and then blast whatever. But this was something what I really missed in this. And also there was one more. There was also in continuous noise, there was also a very clear point of restriction, the devices, the harassment devices in the MPAs. This is, a kind of in contradiction with the measures recommended by ICES and implemented about the usage of deterrent devices in the Putsk Bay, which is, as we call it, and we have been calling it a kind of hotspots for harbour porpoises. So, yeah, this is more or less coming to my mind, that how it goes together with other recommendations and measures actually implemented.
Yes, thanks, Ivona. to start with, I think it's important to remember that these measures are not an exhaustive list because we had limited time in the workshop. So I agree that blasting, for example, should be addressed in an MPA. I looked at what we had. We had banned military activities, but I do know also that military activities are very difficult to manage because they don't have to listen to anyone else. So I am aware of this, and it's really difficult to do anything about. I think it's important to try and have the dialogue with the military. And for example, this workshop that ASCOBANS and ASCOBANS arranged 1 year ago, I believe. We tried to get that dialogue going because the military today don't really consider the effects that these blastings have, but there are methods where you can use, like bubble curtains, for example, if you actually need to do an explosion at sea. And I know we discussed this at an AC meeting a few years ago too, when there was something being blasted in Poland, and this German company offered to come with bubble curtains. I think it's a matter of progression in the state of mind in the military, basically, that they need to become aware that they should think about this and that there are methods that work. But I do know it's difficult. So I don't really know how to solve this problem. And then you said something about continuous noise as well. Please remind me.
That was about the deterrents.
Oh yeah,
deterrents.
yes. I mean, so the ICES advice does contain having pingers in the Puts Bay area. That's correct. I don't like to say this, but that was a political thing that happened in the ICES process. We were quite clear in that process that we didn't want to see ADDs in MPAs, that was a measure that we considered reasonable outside of important areas. But the Polish people didn't really accept that. So the only way we could move forward and get the advice ready was to accept the pingers in that MPA. So I would say that in general, having ADDs in MPAs is not advisable. If it's an important harbor purpose area, we shouldn't scare them off. But also, it might be better than having fisheries there. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And the last question, there was something I wanted to say about that too. What was that, Ivona? Do you remember what was your last thing? We can do it later. Ante?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, good morning. I don't have any question, but I would just like to say something complementary to what Ivona said. So when it comes to controlled blasting the ammunition in the sea, as far as I know, it is obligatory to apply for a derogation from scaring of the protected species because this is regulated by the Habitats Directive. And as far as I know, the military bodies, they do apply, they do get the permissions from the regional directorates for the environmental protection. And those bodies can set some conditions within the permissions, and they do. As far as I know, the bubble curtains have never been used in Polish waters because physically we don't have them. Of course, it could be possible to bring them from Germany, for example, but physically our military services, they don't have them. But there are some other ways of minimizing the blasting, like, for example, soft start, which means that you start with small amount of noise to scare the species of the area before the proper explosion takes place. And also they are obliged to report on the results of the blasting. So they are supposed to give the information to the Regional Directorate for the Environmental Protection about any species that were observed like dead or harmed after the explosion. And as far as I know, none of them were observed in terms of either cetaceans or birds. So it's not that bad. Thanks.
Thanks, Andre. I think it's important to notice, though, that it's very unlikely that you will see a harbor porpoise if it dies. I mean, it might wash up on shore later, but I don't think you can count on seeing all the porpoises that die, or the behavioral impact that these activities have. So, yeah, it is.
All right, I can take one more short question and then we are going to close this off. So if anybody still has something to ask or to comment on, then you're welcome to do so now. Otherwise, we're going to close this webinar off. Last chance. All right. I think then I just want to share a quick slide in terms of kind of next steps. Not that there are actually next steps, really, it's more about is this an inspiration? So for example, in Shetland, perhaps this is something that you can start off with. But essentially there is the full report that you can download, which I think will be shared in the chat shortly as well. Thank you, Paul. So please have a look at that so that you can go and see if this is something that you can use in your daily work. The presentations, as well as the recording of this webinar, will be available on the Protect Baltic website, which is on the screen. And Ida is very happy to get questions from you, so please get in touch with her if there's anything that is unclear and that you would like to find out about. But having said that, thank you so much for our 3 speakers today, and thank you all for attending, and hopefully you have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
Very
you.
nice.
Thank you very
Nice to
much.
see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.